I'm Stephen Sashin from the Movement Podcast. You can find us at jointhemovementmovement.com or all the various places where you can think of where you'd find Join the Movement Movement. If you go to jointhemovementmovement.com, you'll see Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and iTunes and everywhere else. And this is a podcast for people who want to learn the truth about how to move healthily, happily, strong, to have healthy, happy, strong bodies, and to cut through the mythology that people have been propagating that might keep you from doing that. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that typically it's just me doing a lot of ranting. Well, I'm happy that's not the case this time. I have my friend, Dr. Bryan Heiderscheit. We will be exploring something interesting. One of the many things we'll be exploring, could you improve your running and get rid of your injuries by moving faster without running faster? I know that sounds crazy, but we'll jump in and find out how that works. So first of all, Bryan, hello.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's really not for saying, hey, thanks for doing this again because the recording didn't work the last time. That's what happened. Here we are again. I'm going to ask you a question that I asked before. Maybe you have a better answer now. You're a PhD, which means you have a doctor of philosophy technically, so say something philosophical.
No improvements at all. You know that. It's going to be the same. I have nothing impressive to say.
That's actually very Zen of you. There's no improvements at all.
Oh.
I like it. Okay, I'm just going to stick with that one. I'll stick with after Zen, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers.
I suppose that would be true.
Okay. So when we started this conversation originally 20 minutes ago, and I asked you how you got to where you got to, and you were talking about how originally you were doing research on footwear. Shoe companies were selling you stuff. If you had to sum up what you discovered from that in like an elevator sentence, what would you say that you discovered?
One of the challenges definitely is that when we tried to do the testing on the different shoes, on the material properties of the shoe, that they did not well represent what would happen when people ran.
Ooh, that's interesting. So what happens in the lab does not equal what happens in real life.
Right, exactly. And that wasn't our intent of testing the shoes, was actually to give information about the shoes themselves, not to interpret 5, 6, 7 miles down the road and say what they actually would do in terms of injury risk and performance. But of course, that's many times how that information is extrapolated.
So wait, you're saying that you did not give information that showed that shoes improved performance or reduced injury, but the shoe companies then would take your data and say that's what they did?
Yes, correct. We did not do that, whether it's the shoe companies or others who interpreted it incorrectly. Yes, we did not do that.
It's funny. There are some researchers who will remain nameless, but if they're listening, they will know who they are, who especially trying to prove that minimalist and barefoot running is frankly bullshit. They have studied VO2 max, and which is basically how well your body uses oxygen for people who don't know. And what they showed in a small study that has not been replicated, that involved people who were claimed to be proficient barefoot runners, even though I know none of the people that were in that study and I know all the local barefoot runners. And the conclusion was that the barefoot runners, their VO2 max was lower than the people who were running in regular running shoes. By the way, the regular running shoes were sponsored by the company that sponsors this entire lab. And so my argument was, hey, who cares? Because what your VO2 max is in the lab doesn't say anything about how you're going to perform in real life. And luckily, the same lab is now saying we're still seeing VO2 max improvements with the so-and-so, I won't mention the brand by name, but it rhymes with Flikey, Vaporfly, but we don't know why, and we're not saying that it's going to change the way you perform in real life. And I actually had someone say, well, how come so many people are setting personal bests in that shoe? I said, for the same reason other people are setting personal bests in other shoes. It's not what people say. So that's the short version of what you discovered then. And now, what's got your interest now? What are you doing both either in research and or clinically?
Yeah, so both environments, we're truly trying to look at how people are moving and if we think that their movement could be influencing their injury risk. And if we do think so, then what changes can we make and how?
Ooh, so we'll jump into that in a second, but I realized that since we skipped and did our intro a second time, I didn't give you the luxury of saying where you are and what you do.
Oh, sure.
Dinner party.
Professor.
Dinner party. Hey, man, what do you do?
I work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a professor in the Department of Orthopedics and Rehab, as well as the physical therapy program. I direct the University of Wisconsin Health Runners Clinic and have a clinic within UW Athletics to help with the Badger athletes.
Cool. And to let people know, Bryan and I met through an event that he puts on with Dr. Irene Davis from Harvard and Dr. Chris Powers at USC called The Science of Running Medicine, which you can find at scienceofrunning.net. If you're a physical therapist, you're going to want to go to one of these events. This is where the three of them, let's just say, argue to some extent about the best way to evaluate and treat runners and running injuries. And we will jump into that in just a bit, in fact. So when you're analyzing movement now and trying to find ways for people to run better, healthier, et cetera, what's the thing that you're focusing on primarily?
So we try to come up with standards that can be done in just about any sort of clinical setting. So we've done a number of high-tech research studies that have shown us some relationship between movement patterns and potential biomechanical loads and injury risk. But the challenge is that most clinicians don't have access to that sort of technology, or at least can't afford a lot of the technology. And so we've tried to make other measures or other movement measurements that they can do in a clinic setting.
So some of the stuff that you're talking about involves force plate data and just looking at kinematics, basically how joints are moving and joint angles and various things like that.
Yeah, so when we're doing the research studies, we've got our optic motion capture system, 8 cameras, all synchronized with force plate platform data, some muscle EMG pattern recordings, all being fed back into a single computer where we can recreate that individual movement as best we can using some of our models.
When you say this, it reminds me, so the panel discussion that I was on at the American College of Sports Medicine last year, there were some guys from Adidas who had their motion capture stuff, and they were all really proud of it. And they showed two things that I didn't have the time to go, are you kidding me? But the two things were, the first was showing a runner from the side and how when the runner's foot hit the ground, look, we can actually see the impact forces when they hit the ground. Isn't that cool? But what they showed was this massive spike of force that was heading in the opposite direction the person was running. So like they're slamming on the brakes while they're landing on their heel. And they were going, isn't that amazing? We can study this. Like, no. You're missing the big thing here. They just put on the brakes. Let's not even talk about what it means to send that force of spike through your body. There's some arguments about that. I think they're bad arguments. I think it's pretty obvious you don't want that. As much as you can reduce it, you want to reduce it. But regardless, even if you think that it's totally fine, it makes no sense to be having that much force going in the opposite direction you're trying to run. The second thing, they showed a runner from behind just when their foot hit the ground, and they showed the direction and the amount of force that was going in different directions. And so what they showed, the runner's foot first hits the ground and there's a force vector pointing at like 45 degrees out. I don't remember if it was in or out, frankly, but then it almost immediately switches to 45 degrees from in the other direction, and then to like 30 and then to 20. And then it finally gets straight up and down when the runner hits mid stance. And all I could think is, dudes, this is in the motion controlled shoe that you've spent 50 years developing. Really? That's the best you can do? And they were looking at it again, like it was super cool that you could capture this. And I'm looking at it like, wow, that's super cool. You just proved that what you do doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's some truth to that for sure. Yeah.
So when you simplify things to give clinicians something that they can work with, what have you landed on, pun intended?
The main thing is that most clinicians are going to have access to what they see. But of course, your human eyes, the eyes are not going to be able to capture the level of detail that you need to look at some of the running mechanics pieces. We provide a way that they can utilize just a simple high-speed camera that most of us have available to us through our phones or something else that allows us to slow down the movement pattern and look at very particular aspects of the movement pattern that can give us insights into biomechanical loads.
Can you be a little more vague, please?
Yes, I can absolutely be more vague. The specific things that we look for in terms of like flaws in movement is how much the person moves up and down, how much their center of mass, if you want to call it that, but
how bouncy they are.
Their head, you could use their shoulder, how much they bounce.
Yeah.
Another one is
actually, wait, hold on. I want to pause there. That's an interesting thing because a lot of runners that I see, they collapse in their midsection. They basically run and they look like a spring. They look like
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you only watch their head move, their head may stay straight while their body is just collapsing left and right, or the other way around where people get super stiff and then they get really bouncy. And I think about Glenn Mills, who's Usain Bolt's coach. Glenn says that before Usain became an actual 100-meter runner, they spent a year just working on his core strength because he had been really collapsy and they had to tighten that up. So that's an interesting thing to consider. It's like watching how bouncy someone is, but if they're not bouncy, it could be that they're not necessarily doing the right thing still. So that's intriguing.
Yeah. So ideally, you'd be tracking it at their hip, right? And then you
right.
see how much that's moving up and down. But you're absolutely right, because we do see the same thing where their trunk tends to extend or flex and extend and flex as they're moving. And so therefore their head does this thing. So exactly what you're describing.
Yeah. Okay. So we're checking to see how bouncy they are and what else?
Yep. Checking to see how much they bounce. Second thing we look for is are they what we think of as being an overstrider. And overstriding is one that a lot of people are like, how do you even define that? Overstriding does not mean a long stride length. Obviously, as you run faster, you have to have a longer stride length. Stride length should increase. Overstriding really is what we're talking about is at that instant of landing where that foot is positioned relative to your center of mass.
And so what would you call bad versus good? Someone's going to
So
watch
in
that.
terms of distance, that's the hard part because all of that's the hard thing about any sort of movement mechanics, that almost all of it scales with speed to
Right.
some extent. So if we try to put a value on it and say, oh, you should land 10 centimeters ahead of your center of mass.
Right.
That only works if I'm running at a certain speed.
Certain speed. And this is something that I've pointed out to people is they'll watch video of somebody running and they'll talk about them overstriding or not and have no sense of what speed is.
Yeah.
So, and the real effect of speed is if you're moving across the ground much faster, your foot can touch the ground further in front of your body, but it's not getting weighted until your body's over it because your body's moving that fast. And so really that's where a force plate comes in handy because you can see where the force happens in relation to the center of mass. But in lieu of that, so when you're giving people guidance about what they want to look for, what's good or bad in terms of overstriding, what do you tell people if they don't have access to a force plate and they're just looking at video and have to trying to maybe factor in speed?
Yeah, so what we try to do is there's a couple of other surrogate measures, such as looking at the knee angle, the
Knee
how
flexion
flexible
angle?
your knee is at initial contact,
Okay.
and then also looking at your shank or the lower leg, the tibial, and how far off of vertical that is. You want to get that closer toward vertical.
So ideally then you're looking for more of your lower leg, your tibia, to be more vertical and the knee angle to be
25 degrees roughly.
Yeah. So basically with that small knee angle and a vertical tibia, that basically means you're trying to get your foot underneath your body. It's the short version of that.
Yeah.
And what do you care, or do you have any thoughts about where your foot is hitting the ground in that?
In terms of a foot strike angle, foot inclination angle?
Either foot angle or this, heel strike, midfoot, forefoot.
Yeah. So our big approach with that is that I'm less concerned about the exact angle they hit the ground in, or if they use a forefoot, midfoot, or rear foot strike pattern. But I usually define it 4 ways. So you've got a forefoot, midfoot, rear foot, and then heel strike. So I consider heel strike to be this bigger category, right? Because when you think about the potential angles that your foot can get in, you can go into 40 degrees of an angle
Right.
and still be towards your rear foot. Whereas forefoot strikers are going to be in a much, much smaller range. You don't see a 40-degree forefoot striker.
No, but the thing also though is obviously footwear is going to make a difference because if you put a big heel underneath someone, then you're more likely to hit that in advance and have it hit ahead of your body. Or more accurately, or another way of saying that is if you actually have that small knee angle and vertical shin angle, it's actually harder to land on your heel because it's basically already behind you. So those factors, I assume, play into it as well. Especially, do you test people both like in and out of shoes to see what that looks like?
We don't do too much out of shoes, but what we do, for example, with our athletes who run collegiately, most of them are wearing the exact same shoes or very, very, very similar shoes. And we test them at a whole range of running speeds. So we're able to make comparisons and look at, do individuals with different shoes land in different distances ahead of themselves, or the same shoe at different speeds? How does that factor in? And interestingly enough, even when they're wearing similar shoes, they can have a whole range of overstriding risk.
When I was spending time in Bill Sands' lab, who's a former head of biomechanics for the U.S. Olympic Committee, he was at Colorado Mesa University is what they've, I think, since renamed themselves to. What he saw is every different shoe changed people's gait unless they were like internationally ranked, typically middle distance runners and lower, like anyone running the 1500 or lower. You could put bricks on their feet and nothing changed. But anybody north of that or anyone who's not that skilled, every shoe made a difference. And same thing, if they were jogging, it was sometimes different than if they were at full speed. I also saw things, we took some habitual or people who were well-trained barefoot runners and then put them in a pair of 5 fingers, and they went from barefoot running with a midfoot or forefoot strike to heel striking and overstriding in their 5 fingers. And here's the kicker, they didn't know they were doing it. So it was fascinating to see. Now, the one thing that Bill would do, he'd put you on the treadmill and it was like 5 feet wide, 10 feet long. He puts you in a Mission Impossible harness. So in case you fall, you're just hovering, you don't land on your face and go flying off the back of the treadmill and make an America's Funniest Home Video. But he would put you in your favorite shoes and watch you filming at 500 frames a second. And then he'd have you run barefoot. And we saw that 95% tops, when they went barefoot, their gait changed into something that was way closer to what you described without any instruction. And I found when I was in his lab, if I gave people who were still overstriding and heel striking 30 seconds of instruction, it would change. So we were seeing dramatic differences with just that simple intervention. Now, whether that would stick when they put on shoes or not is a different story, but it was incredible to see how quickly people would adapt.
Yeah, I agree. People can change their gait, like you said, whether it's an external trigger that does it, such as the shoes or terrain or gradient or whatever it might be, or if you try to use some sort of verbal cue.
Yeah. The verbal cues, I found people doing two things that really surprised me when I first started seeing it, but it made sense after I saw it. The first was people who would overstride. They'd have their foot way out in front of them, and then they'd plantar flex. They'd point their toe to the ground. So they're prancing when they ran. Like,
exactly.
why are you doing that? They said, well, I'm supposed to land on my forefoot, but not like that.
Exactly.
So
I've seen quite a few people, not just for forefoot strikers, but those who have read something and decide that they're going to adopt that running style.
Right.
And they adopt it in a way that you're like, wait a second, time out. That's not what we were after at all.
Here's the other one.
Whether it's some other cue or change that they've read about.
Right. The other one that I found is people who run, they look like Groucho Marx. So they bend their legs a whole lot and they still overstride, but they're catching their foot on the ground and then pulling it below them. So they're not applying a lot of force, but it looks
like they're skiing.
Yeah. It looks like cross-country skiing.
That's exactly right. Yep. We see the same thing.
Yeah. And again, I was like,
it's just exhausting.
Right. I know. It's like, how did you think to do that? And then I realized, oh, you're supposed to put less force on the ground. You're supposed to bend your knees. They came up with those cues and they found a way that works for them. I've talked to some people who refer to themselves as accomplished barefoot runners because they've run half marathons and then they run like that. It's allowed them to do it, but I wouldn't call it necessarily the best choice for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot imagine trying to run faster.
No, you've definitely got a limit. And that's the thing is when you, one of the things that I've seen, especially if they're barefoot runners doing that, when they put on something like one of our products, which allows them to run faster, suddenly they discover form cues or form problems that they didn't know they had because their form changes. And they say, hey, this shoe is like making a bunch of noise. No, you're making noise because you're slapping the shoe down because it's just the variation that you've made from your Groucho Marx thing to being able to have more form or better form, but you haven't adapted to that yet. It's really fascinating. Lena likes to call our shoes a coach because they're giving you information you can use. But I've seen some people have interesting relationships with their coaches.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so I know, and partly what inspired this conversation is that one of the things that you focus on in the Science of Running medicine events is cadence. So I know that's another thing that you look at, and this is full of mythology.
Oh my goodness, is it ever?
So please jump in.
Yeah, so we utilize, it should step back. The reason we went toward cadence and step rate is not because it was the solution, but because it was something that people could understand and could utilize as a cue to trigger some of the changes we were after mechanically. And that's what's been the challenge is people forget about the rest of what I just said and they focus on step rate is the answer, the solution. And therefore we get all these issues that we're trying to correct now.
So let's talk about what is valuable in cadence and define it for humans who don't know it. And then let's talk about the part that gets lost where people think it's a one size fits all panacea for all running problems.
Yeah, so step rate is the number of foot strikes that occur per minute. So if you count how many times your foot hits the ground or both feet hit the ground, now you have the number of steps per minute.
I want to jump in here and because I want you to highlight something that cracks me up. When people talk about, especially barefoot running, and minimalists in general, the phrase that gets used a lot is shorten your stride.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, my head wants to pop off my shoulders and then spin around and then explode, or just explode, either way, because people don't realize that stride length is just the distance from when your foot hits to when your foot hits, and you can have an appropriate, quote, short stride, barefoot stride, and have a long stride length because you're running fast, applying a lot of force into the ground when you do that. But for many people, that is the cue that makes sense because they can't see behind themselves. So they don't realize that their stride is actually the same length. It's just that it's happening in what's referred to as the backside mechanics instead of frontside mechanics. So,
well, and whether it's backside mechanics or whether it's float mechanics, because arguably most of your increase in stride length as you run faster and better occurs in the air.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, back to cadence.
Yeah, so you're right. When you think about running speed, let's just say you're running an 8-minute mile, right? And you have your number of steps per minute and you've got the length of each step. And so you put those two together, now you have speed. And so what you've said is if you increase your number of steps per minute, that means you have to decrease the stride length. And while there is some element
if you're keeping the same
relationship, but there also is a way you can do so without compromising the advantages of stride length. Because in order to run fast, you have to have a decent stride length.
So just to clarify, if you're staying at the same speed and you have longer stride length, you have to have faster turnover, faster cadence. But obviously, if you're increasing cadence and stride length stays the same, that's the same thing I just said. Then that's going to make you run faster.
Yeah.
So what is it about cadence that is both interesting to you clinically and from an intellectual perspective, and talk about just how it's become this sort of magic holy grail thing in the minimalist running world?
So the reason we got into it was because of what I mentioned before about the flaws of running, which is like excessive bounce,
right,
and then overstriding. And when you increase somebody's cadence, you will reduce their bounce, and you can reduce how far they hit the ground ahead of their center of mass. They will reduce their overstride. And so what we do is we utilize those cues at a higher step rate so we can force them to feel what we want them to feel. And then without necessarily saying, oh, what we've done is now we've taken you from 158 steps per minute to 168 steps per minute. That means from now on, you are a 168 step per minute runner. That's what you were born with. And really, if you look under your scalp, you'll see tattooed on your forehead 168, because that's what you were prescribed when you were born. And that's completely false, right? Obviously, if you run faster, that number has to change. If you're running uphill or downhill.
So wait, are you suggesting that this idea that most people have that you're supposed to run at 180 steps per minute might not be true?
Right. And so then
you heretic.
Yeah, when 180 comes into play and says that is like this is optimum for all, which just flies in the face of common sense, right? When you think of how different we are in terms of our body size and shape and fitness levels, and that we're all supposed to get up and run at exactly the same step rate. It makes no sense, regardless of what speed we are.
So then two questions come to mind. One is, talk to me about how you work with someone, and obviously they're doing this on a treadmill at first, they have to get out in the wild and find it differently, but talk to me about how you work with someone to find what is, let's call it an optimal range, given conditions changing. And also talk about what the value of doing that is, what's happening when people, other than the fact that by increasing their cadence while not running faster, you're more likely to end up with that knee angle and shin angle, so vertical shin angle, slight knee angle, foot underneath your body basically. But what else happens, and how do you guide people to finding what's right for them?
Yeah, great point. So the first one that we want to make sure on is that it's always relative to where they're starting from. So we're not making a guesstimate, looking at them and measuring their body height and their body mass and their running speed and putting it into an equation and coming up with, this is your optimum step rate. Those don't exist.
You haven't done that because you don't want to be rich.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think people have tried to do that.
Yeah,
back in the 70s, 80s, and it failed pretty miserably. So it's really not something that we're able to pick up in any sort of predictive way. Other than what we do is we look at their mechanics, and like I said before, if their knee flexion angle, if their tibial angle, if their bounce is too much, whatever step rate they're running at when they're showing those flawed mechanics, then we want to adjust that step rate. Could be as little as 4 steps per minute. It could be as many as 14 steps per minute to a point where we see improvements in those flaws. And then the idea is we use the metronome to guide that change initially. And why do we use a metronome? Because we didn't even, before we started using step rate, we would just do verbal cueing, like you described before. Hey, bend your knee a little bit more, bring your foot more into your center of mass, don't bounce as much, bring your tibial more. And number one, the people didn't necessarily understand what we were asking them to do. And number two, there was too many verbal cues for them to even conceptually understand and figure out a solution to. So we tried to take a lot of that initial thinking away and say, here, follow this rhythm. And then once we think we got the rhythm there a little bit, then we'll supplement with verbal cues in a sense of saying, what feels different? Do you feel like you're bouncing less? Do you feel like your knee is softer? Do you feel like you're more under your center of mass, off your heel?
I have three thoughts, and I'm going to have to give them to you all at once, or I'll lose them. One is, how would you guide people to play with this on their own? Mm-hmm. Two is, I lost the third already. Two is, what does it take for people to get used to that new cadence? Because we do the one we do because we're used to it, and something new will feel weird. And the third is, do you, in that process, once it looks better to you, do you try to move them over that so they can pendulum swing towards where you think might be ideal. It's something I do with people where I'm trying to think of the specific thing that I have them do. Oh, it's about lean or various things where I have them try to exaggerate something.
Exactly.
Just because otherwise
Yep.
what's correct feels weird. And if you exaggerate it, then coming back feels more normal. So again, for people who aren't going to go into a clinic necessarily and want to experiment with this, the process of getting more comfortable with that cadence and then going further and coming back to, just however you might use that in the lab.
So I'm going to take those out of order. The second one first being that how do we get people to get more comfortable with it? How long does it take even? Comfort is a hard one because that tends to vary quite a bit between people. People can reproduce what we're asking nearly immediately, within 1 or 2 sessions. And if I bring it back a month later and say, hey, I want you to run the way I showed you to run before, they can reproduce this for it. It was spot on. That doesn't mean that they were doing it the whole time, but they've recalled enough where they can reproduce that rhythm.
Right.
Comfort element is something that I think we struggle with, and that is that there's always this, if you take a runner and put him in a very distracted environment, even after undergoing very good gait retraining, that distracted environment, many times you will see their old pattern start to push itself out. So it's always there. It's just being masked and pushed down pretty heavily.
Right.
Which means that, again, for a while there, running is going to take some thought and some cognitive override to make it happen. So comfort becomes challenging because of that. But and related to that, in terms of somebody being able to do it on their own, I'm actually very hesitant about doing any gait changes on people outside of the clinic for what we said before, which is many times they'll adopt a pattern that you're like, whoa, that is not what I was after. And that's actually very injury risk increase, such as that groucho run pattern you described. That is a huge issue for hip flexor overutilization and all the problems that go on with that type of running. So when we utilize gait retraining in my clinic, it is strictly for injured runners who have had injuries, chronic injuries, trying to get back from an injury. Then we will utilize this as a solution. I think where I struggle with, and this is an area that we've explored briefly, which is, do we ever try to change gait in people who are not injured? Right. Or from a performance standpoint, we've tweaked performance issues a little bit, or gait for performance issues a little bit. But the idea of trying to preventing running injuries through gait change, that is a really tough one. And the science is way behind that.
It's one of the things when people ask me about running in zero shoes, for example, I go, there's 3 reasons I can think of you wouldn't want to do it. One is if you don't want to just spend some time to get used to it, which is silly. It's like saying, hey, my arm came out of a cast, but I'm never going to use my arm again. It's going to take some time to get stronger. The second is, I don't remember what the second is. I'm having trouble with lists of 3 right now. I get 3 in my head and then 1 disappears. But the biggest one is if you are a competitive athlete, don't do it. If your livelihood depends on what you're doing, don't mess with it for now. Now, if you get injured, that's a different story. Right. If you think there's other reasons you may, in the off season, want to start experimenting, don't be a bonehead. And it's a really interesting point. Now, the idea that of people putting themselves in a dangerous situation by experimenting with cadence, I will, of course, say, look, it's not rocket science. Play with it and see what happens.
That's exactly right.
Use your body as a guide. If something feels wrong, maybe it is. If something feels awkward, that's a slightly different story because you're not used to it. But definitely, if you can get video feedback, that would be really helpful, because then you can watch and just see where your foot's landing, see what the shin angle is. And these are things that many people can see relatively simply. And I'm going to come back to that point in a second. But there's another thing about cadence that's interesting, and I'd love for you to comment on it. I don't know whose study it was. Maybe it was coming out of your lab for all I know, about cadence and force. And I made a U-shaped curve because it seemed that with increased cadence, the amount of force, the impact loading forces were lower up to a certain point, and then they started getting higher. And of course, speaking as a sprinter, sprinters are trying to get the maximum impact force because that's what makes you run faster, mass specific force. But distance runners, by and large, are looking to decrease force within kind of a window. So can you tell me about that aspect and what you've noticed there?
That I'm not actually familiar with that particular relationship. So no, I understand the relationship between VO2 and cadence and loading rate and foot inclination angles. We see some of sort of curvilinear relationships, but impact force gets lower and then higher.
Well, I mean, I think the basic idea is that if you are landing in the way we're describing, which is basically foot under your body rather than way out in front of your body, you're just not going to get that massive spike of force initially. And you're actually, if you're landing the way that we're talking about, you're going to be using your muscles, ligaments, and tendons as the springs and shock absorbers they're supposed to be, more than using your joints to try to absorb that, or the shoe, which will never do it, to try to absorb that. So I think that's the gist, is that increasing cadence is another cue that just leads to that form change that can lead to reduced loading forces. But then you get to a certain point, and again, as you start becoming a sprinter, you're putting more force in the ground. That's the only way you can do that. So I thought you were going to know that when we were going to have
I'm sorry, probably should.
So look, if I can find it, this is something that I remember seeing 7-8 years ago. If I can find it, I'll track it down and send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be good, because you're absolutely right that, I think when you're talking about any of these metrics, even in terms of how much you bounce up and down,
oh yeah,
it doesn't mean you want to bounce less to zero. If you don't bounce at all, you are very inefficient as well.
It's interesting you say that. There's some runners that you see that look like there's whoop, just, like skating on ice. And it looks so cool because their head just doesn't move at all. But, and some of them are really fast, but it's not, that's ideal. That's just, and I've played with that. And it's like, I can't do that one. I don't bounce very much, but I can't do that skating on ice thing. It looks super cool.
But I think the other thing too is that, you're a lot of the examples you're describing also in the sprinting realm. And again, we're going from distance running speeds to sprinting. It's not just a linear change.
No. Whole different world.
But the mechanics change in much different ways.
Yeah, there are certain mechanical changes that are very different and some that are exactly the same. So the basic idea of where you want your foot to land is basically the same. The gist of how you're applying force is basically the same. But it's just there's just extremes in sprinting that you don't see in distance running. But if you look at a good distance runner and a good sprinter, and you look at it in super slow motion, some of those differences are really hard to see unless you're staring at someone at 500 frames a second in super slow-mo. It has to do with how well your knee extends as you're entering the swing phase. There's all these like really weird things that when you know them, they're really obvious. But if you don't know, it just looks like someone sprinting is just running faster than someone who's a distance runner, which is not the case at all. Yeah. So here's where I want to get into something fun. So back to the science of running medicine events. You and Chris and Irene, you argue about a number of points and you agree on a certain number of points. And I have a theory about, I'm going to say it this way, and I'll say something and I want to ask you to comment on it. Mm-hmm. I said to Irene, who does this amazing presentation about her research, which essentially shows how regular running shoes can be the cause of problems, and getting out of those and into something truly minimalist. And under truly minimalist, she does what she calls minimalist and partial minimalist. I call it true minimalist and fake minimalist. And so in the true minimalist category, there's Us Zero shoes and Vivo Barefoot and some 5-finger shoes and one Innovate shoe that's no longer made. But anyway, she shows here's why running shoes can cause these problems. Here's why natural movement in a truly minimalist shoe can get rid of those. And it's a very well thought out linear presentation. And I said, it's almost ridiculous that at the end of your presentation, people don't come running to my booth and tackle me and steal my shoes. But they don't. Typically, about half the people in the room will come up to get more information, and then about half of them will end up trying what we're doing and seeing what's going on. And I have 2 theories about why that doesn't happen. But actually, first, I want to stop there and just have you comment on just what Irene has shown and how that doesn't relate to what you're doing and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so you're right. We do argue quite a bit. And Irene is a fantastic presenter and has a wealth of knowledge and studies that she's put on over the last several decades that's really informed her approach to it. I think that there are some extrapolations in their data, not over speculation, I'm not suggesting that, but to take it to the level of saying that this will reduce injuries and this will enable you to run faster, perform better. Those are elements that are still big gaps, and that we all have gaps.
And I'm going to interrupt there to say, because I don't think that she ever says this will make you run faster or perform better.
No, I think you're right. I think that's true. I think it's true, which actually I think is a gap, right? So
it's funny. It's funny. Phil Maffetone, he wrote a book called 159, and his prediction is the first person to run a real marathon sub 2 hours will be barefoot or in our shoes, something that's as light as possible, but just giving you something to protect you from the ground, but basically as light as possible. But yeah, that to determine whether, and we have people who claim they're setting, and they are setting PRs all day, every day. We hear about people. I'm not saying that we do that. There's more to it than that. But yeah, the long-term study on injury prevention prevention and improve performance, that's an interesting one and a tricky one and an expensive one and a time-consuming one. So that doesn't exist right now, in large part because the people on my side, the truly minimalist camp, we don't have the cash to put out the money for that research. And what a shock, the big shoe companies, they're not going to do it because the last thing they want to find out is that we're right. And I know a number of them suspect that we're right because anyway, they've looked at the research, they've experimented on their own, they have that. So ignoring the performance injury part or the injury prevention part, although she does talk about that and does have some ideas about how making these changes would be preventative. But regardless, okay, so that was an interruption just about what she's saying and where you're going from there.
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of her data are based on loading rate information, what we know about how people run on loading rates.
Okay.
And that loading rates, as it changes, as it goes down, that's a good thing, and that has always potential advantages for it. And that's the hard part where, again, I think the three of us argue on, and that is the importance of loading rate from a ground reaction force measurement, vertical ground reaction force loading rate. It obviously has relevance and meaning and has been shown to have some relevance towards certain types of injuries. It's just the extrapolation of, is this the one size fits all?
It's interesting you say it that way, because I'm going to toss out one argument and then another theory about why people don't rush and tackle me after her presentation. The other thing she talks about is more than just loading rate, is loading patterns and styles. So for example, if you have a shoe with a flared sole,
Yep.
the flared sole is going to hit the ground first. It's going to create a fulcrum that actually causes your foot and lower leg and all of your body to move in unnatural patterns that then you have to compensate for. And then of course, like we talked about before, if a shoe breaks down, then that's going to cause problems as well. If it does lead towards if wearing a higher heeled shoe tends to make you be a heel striker, and I like to point out here, wait, I can reach and grab this. I can point out that your heel is a ball, and if you land on a ball, that's unstable, and suddenly you need all these other things to combat that. So there's other pieces to what she's doing other than that. But I'm gonna tell you the argument that I made to her about why people don't rush the stage, and then I'm gonna say something about you. Here's the argument I made to her. I said, the people who are in that room think they've made the decision about what they have on their feet through a rational process. They think they have concluded by whatever analysis and, whoever they listen to, that they're wearing those shoes for a specific good reason. And if they think what they've done is rational, you can't argue them out of that with data. You can't give them other rational things that are going to make them, in fact, they'll look for the tiniest little chink in the armor and go, see, that's got to be all crap because, that I don't believe in that. And that's why I'm wearing these shoes that are 5 inches high and look like stilts, and only people in Ringling Brothers wear them when they're going out on the clown circus. So that's one thing. And I think there's a way around that. I mean, what I like to say is just look at what's natural. Look at your feet have a quarter of the bones and joints, or feet and ankles, a quarter of the bones and joints of your whole body, and no more nerve endings in your soles than anywhere but your fingertips and your lips. Clearly, you're supposed to use these things, and they're supposed to give you certain kinds of information and do certain things. Do your shoes let you do that? Do your feet feel better at the end of the day than they did at the beginning of the day? Do you feel better taking off your shoes than you did putting on your shoes? Mm-hmm. So there's ways of having the conversation that isn't just about data. But here's the other one, and this goes to both you and Chris. What Irene, and actually it's interesting with what you said about how you've changed the way you're working with clinicians. Irene presents a very detailed and, let's say, complicated argument, but even more, it's something that most clinicians aren't going to either have the equipment to implement, or the skill to implement, or the desire to implement. It's like a whole process for analyzing what's going on, coming up with the right intervention, and presenting that to the client, the injured runner, so that they can make these changes and monitoring that over time. It's a very involved thing that I'm willing to bet some of those people in the audience just go, oh, wow, I just can't do that. And some of them may be right. Some of them, that different people have different skill sets about how to look at something and analyze it and know what a common factor is versus an extraneous factor, various things. Then you come out, and Chris, even more than you come out with something really simple. And you go, hey, let's just take a look at cadence. Let's take a look at bounce, and just let's look at those two things. And they go, oh, thank God, I can do that. And so I'm not saying that you're right or wrong. I'm saying that what you're presenting is a simpler story for people to latch on to. And I'm intrigued by that, because I'm intrigued by the stories that we tell and how that leads to different behaviors. And I would say that to a certain, I would argue that you guys actually agree on many more things than you disagree on.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're able to present a story that's as simple as let's play with cadence and bounce, then that just gets, it just seems like it's easier to wrap your hands around. And then Chris's story arguably is even simpler, which for people who don't know, it really has to do with just the angle of your torso when you're running. And that's even simpler for people to go because they can just look at that and show other people. And it just, the simpler stories seem to, not always, but can win. And I'm concerned about that because I'm not saying, again, that the simple story is incorrect, but I would argue that it's probably incomplete. And if we give people something that they can latch on to that is simple, then they're not going to want to pick up something more complicated. Human beings try to avoid doing shit that's hard. And so this is my kind of fundamental concern, and I'll stop ranting in a second. My simple story, in a way, is take off your shoes, find a nice, smooth, hard surface, go for a really short run, 20 seconds, see how you feel the next day. If you feel good, try to add 30 seconds. If you feel sore, wait till you feel better, then do it again until you don't feel sore. And if you feel hurt, then you want to change something, and here's a few cues, until you're having fun, that's the guide, and then start increasing the time. And in a way, that's a simple story as well, and it overcomes a lot of these things, because some of the things that I say is the intervention, pick up your cadence, check where your foot is, see where your body is, all of those little things, but they're secondary to go do a short run, see if you're having fun. If you're not, come back till you can, and then things to play with. So anyway, but that was my half criticism of what happens from in that event in your conversation. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I would start by saying I think you oversimplified my solution.
Good. So
I think you're guilty of that. So I don't think it. I hope that I don't just simply manipulate cadence and overstructuring and call it, because I think there's a big element to it. Because that would be akin to me saying, really, well, Irene's solution is just land on your forefoot, and that'll take care of everything else. Because that is a big element of what you described.
It's true. It's true. Okay, so then
again, that's the nugget take home.
Yeah. Okay, so then for clarification,
but the elements behind it, the justification for it, is much bigger.
Okay, but then so to make sure that people don't walk away thinking that it's just about bouncing cadence, get a little more specific. But I would like you to address just the phenomenon, if you will, of what how these conversations happen and what people do with them. With the goal, of course, is to make people have a better time, be healthy, happy, fun, strong bodies.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said before, which is that we each kind of approach what we're hearing with our own biases that we're coming into the conversation with. I think you have obviously a bias toward Irene's approach. Given what you've explored on your own and where you're at now. I'm not saying that you're closed-minded to other options. I'm saying that you have you're maybe more open to what Irene said.
I would actually contend, I'm not going to disagree, but I would contend that my approach is consistent with both, definitely with you. With Chris, maybe a little less so, because I don't think what he's saying is as important. I don't think it's going to create the effects necessarily that are as important. I'm not saying that I dismiss it. I just diminish the value of it a little more. And I'm happy to talk to him about that, because I don't know what he's done in a clinical setting to see how that works. But I'm open to it, because what I'm more interested in is just what's the thing that's going to basically lead to people having a happy, healthy, good time using their bodies naturally. And that includes what you're doing. I'm exploring this because I want to know what the best story is to tell, so that people can explore and experiment and discover what does work, that is true, that ideally is based on actual research and data, not just anecdotal. Granted, look, we have 15,000 reviews and God knows how many emails and phone calls. So while I don't think that a preponderance of anecdotes equals data, when you have this much anecdotal information, you can't dismiss it.
I hear where you're coming from. And I think the other element that clinically where we've evolved to, because this is not where we started. When we started my clinic practice 25 years ago, it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to do step rate because I love it. Right. It was more about it's one thing that led after the next. And part of it is, I think, where the clinicians, and again, I'm speaking to the audience who comes to the science of running medicine and where they may gravitate toward, a lot of it has to do with what they're hearing from their patients and what they think their patients will actually follow through on and be adherent. Because obviously patient adherence and compliance is enormous.
That's interesting.
And insurance companies getting involved in payer systems. Irene's system is unique. I mean, she does have insurance involved with it, but a lot of it's cash pay as well. Chris's is cash pay. Ours is completely insurance based. We have, if people are out of network, then they may pay cash. They have the option for that. But so you've got a lot of other barriers and constraints.
That's really interesting.
So when you do take on Irene's approach, which she will admit right off the bat, it's more involved, right? Like you said, it's a little more complex in terms of how she goes through this retraining, how many sessions. If you are going to more a forefoot landing and the shift of load to the Achilles and the calf, you've got to prepare all that. You've got to have a patient group who is committed
to
that time. And frankly, if we're dealing with some high school students in the area in the middle of season, it's not going to work. If we're dealing with our collegiate athletes, it's not going to work. Not in the middle of the season anyway, unless they're broken.
Well, look, in the middle of the season. You don't want to mess with things in the middle of the season anyway. But backing up, I don't want to lose your accusation that I oversimplified things. So wouldn't be the first time. If you want to clarify that or add in the points that I overlooked or dismissed or discounted so that people really get what you can give them, that would be great.
I dig into those little details. You'll have to listen to the whole course and the whole talk. So again, the idea of looking at all those interacting elements of the movement mechanics, the cadence was one of those first steps to bring out a lot of the pieces into play. They don't always work. It doesn't always work. Like you mentioned, people can create some sort of solution that you're not totally after. Similar to overstriding, I think that's a key element, but how do you do that at different speeds and how do you really retrain that properly and how much is too much? That's where it comes into a lot of different elements as well. So it gets more complex, and if you just assign a particular step rate, maybe
no, and I'm not and I wasn't suggesting you just step rate because I don't say that. I have written a number of articles and done a number of things about how the whole mythology of 180 steps per minute is complete mythology. But I do say experiment with that, and I do say play with that, and I do recommend video. I have a whole theory, a neurological theory about what it takes to make changes in movement patterns, in part because I did research when I was at Duke on cognitive aspects of motor skill acquisition. And one of the things that I notice is some people, they just have no relationship to what's below their neck. You say, "Are you hungry?" They go, "Yeah." I go, "How do you know?" Expecting them to say, "I feel this hole in the pit of my stomach." They go, "What do you mean? I'm hungry." And they literally just don't have a relationship to feelings in their body. And they need a whole different kind of intervention than people who can feel things, but they don't have good proprioceptive skills. You ask them to put your arm, parallel to the ground, and it looks like it's Nazi Germany because they don't know what parallel is. So they need a lot of video feedback because they have a disconnect between what they think they're doing and what they're doing. Some people, they can feel things. They've got good proprioceptive skills. They just need cues to speed up the process because they'll figure it out on their own, but you can accelerate the learning process. Some people are just naturals, and the problem is they have so much fun doing something new, they get tired and they revert to one of those previous steps. And then there's the phenomenon that we forget that the process of learning is by nature frustrating, because the feeling of frustration is the feeling of laying down new neural pathways and trying to get out of an existing groove. And we forget that we're supposed to feel frustrated when we try it, and then we rest and it integrates a little, and then we come back and it's a little better until we can't remember how to do the old way. And that is a process. I actually have, Irene and I are competing on something. We have some theories about how to do what you're describing to improve adherence and to make this data available so that people can learn it better on their own, or at least keep it better when they leave a clinic. And we're not surprisingly thinking very much the same way for a number of reasons. I don't really care who wins this contest because I want people to be able to move, whether they're running, walking, hiking. I don't give any special magic to running, but it's just movement in general. And I do think there are ways to give people information in a way that works for them, that allows them to learn these new patterns and integrate them. And integrating means getting to the point where they're in the back of your brain and you're not thinking of them anymore. You just do them. And we know it's possible because if it weren't, no one could do a double twisting, double backflip. So we know it's possible to learn highly complex things that we're not wired to learn. It just takes certain kinds of information presented in a certain way to do it. And no one has done that yet. Yeah. And I think we're on the brink of it.
That's very well said. And I think there's always, like you said, a lot of commonalities between the three of our approaches. And we'll also all admit that we utilize all three of the approaches depending on the patient that's in front of us at the time and what their needs are. But figuring out how to teach every person who walks in the clinic, that's the challenge, because there is no one teaching solution for every person that's the same. It has to be robust enough to be able to adjust itself depending on who that listener is.
It's interesting. Someone asked me once about if you could make an app that just gave people the right cue. I go, you can't do that.
That's right. Cue is what changes.
And sometimes it's the right cue at the wrong time.
Right,
Sometimes it's
right.
the wrong cue at the right time. I realized it's not something that's totally unrelated to this. When Lena, my wife, and I, before we were a couple, I was visiting her, and I don't know what I did or said, something that got her very upset. And after a little while of the silent treatment, I went in and said or did something else that made it even worse. and she said, "Did you think that was going to be helpful?" And I said, "Of course I did." And either I was wrong, or on your deathbed, you'll look back and go, "Oh, yeah, that was pretty good." So, and I don't know which, and my apologies. I was trying to be helpful. I get it if it wasn't. Sorry about that. To be mindful of time, that is both yours and the fact that I got an appointment happening soon. If you wanted, what are you looking at for the future? What are you seeing as what's upcoming that has you interested and excited?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do now is recognizing that running injuries are way more than just movement mechanics. That's a part of it, but there's a whole lot more going on there. We're in the middle of a prospective observation study where we've been collecting data on the fairly high level runners for the last 3 years. I've heard from training volume and training habits to sleep habits to nutrition habits to
Interesting.
bone density measures to running mechanics to changes in speed of running mechanics over time, on and on and on, and eventually start to sift through all of those factors.
I want to ask you a weird question. Given the fact that we are, as the book title and best-selling album from two unrelated people says, born to run, as soon as we start walking, we start running. Since this is something that is just part of our DNA, if you will, how do we match that phenomenon, that it really is just something that we start doing, and we start doing well when we start doing it, with the seeming added complexity of trying to address it in the ways that you're describing?
I think so much of it is to do with it is innate in the sense that we know how to do it. That doesn't mean we know how to do it well. In the sense that you see some really unbelievably bad runners.
Yeah.
Or they just can't figure it out. Or what they've done is they've taken walking and just walk faster. And to the point where there's just barely a flight phase and it's really still walking. It's like walking with a little hop, walking with a little leap.
Yeah.
Or the fact that people have run very well when they were kids and playing around on the playground and whatnot, and then they stop.
Right.
At the age of 12 or 14. And then in their mid-30s, when they've had a couple of kids of their own and their bodies have completely changed and it's 20 years later, they now decide that they want to pick up running as an activity or as a hobby. And remembering how to do that and recognizing that you're not the same person as you were then, and the movement patterns better change, or you got problems.
When I got back into sprinting at 45 after a 30-year break and was injured pretty much constantly for about the next 2 years, the biggest lesson that I learned, and it took me literally 2 years to learn this, is when I have the thought, let me just do one more, that's when I should stop. It's like in my brain, I'm still 18. I could totally do another 4 or 5 of these. I just cut it out. And that extra day, no, I can't do that either.
Yep.
So, and watching sprinters get older, watching what changes in sprinting biomechanics is very interesting, because you just aren't as strong as you get. I was at the senior games. I had just turned 50, I guess, so I just qualified. And all the 60-year-old guys are hanging out with me saying, "Oh, God, when you get to be 60, it just goes over a cliff." And the 80-year-old guys walked up and went, "You guys have no idea what you're talking about." But it's true. And you watch what changes when muscles atrophy. Sarcopenia is a real thing. You just can't keep the same muscle mass and the same strength as you get older. And then you have to make changes. And the changes are relatively similar that these guys have. And you just hope that you can figure it out in real time, because you can't do it in advance. If you try to make those changes in advance, it doesn't work. And interestingly, you know what the biggest change it turns into? Cadence.
Oh, yeah.
They just try to get more steps in the ground and instead of covering more distance. It's really interesting to see. And some of these guys are still like crazy fast. It's both hopeful, inspiring, and annoying. I just don't see it. So, all right. One last question. Well, here, if people want to find out more about what you're up to and get information about that, where would you direct them?
All right. For the general public, certainly check us out at University of Wisconsin's website, University of Wisconsin-Madison website, and the Department of Orthopedics and Rehab. They can see all of our research that we have going on. For the clinicians in the audience, physical therapists, physicians, other healthcare professionals across the board, if you're interested in running medicine, check us out at sciencerunning.net for our annual Science of Running Medicine conference. We hold once a year. Next year, we're looking to most likely go be at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota.
Oh, that'd be fun. Now, but yeah, I know you are also, there's other events. What's the one coming up? People might be.
The one coming up, so we also have the running summit that we host in partnership with Mountainland Physical Therapy based out of Utah. So we will be in Park City, Utah in middle of September in 2019. Yeah, and it's been our 4th annual event. It's really a fun time. It changed the agenda and itinerary changes every single conference. We have new speakers internationally that are brought in, physicians, physical therapists, strength conditioning coaches, a number of pharmacists, sleep medicine experts come in and speak on various running related topics. But again, it's focused on a healthcare provider audience.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I actually just signed up to be a sponsor.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're excited. Well, I'd love to have you out there.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. Well, it's just over the mountain for me. So it's a pretty easy trip. And then I go right down the hill into Salt Lake City and go to the Red Iguana for dinner. It's the best Mexican food I've ever had. So that was really the inspiration. I don't care about your runners.
So you know what? There's a reason why we chose Park City, Utah in September.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a pretty fine place. I call it's Boulder-esque if you just made it smaller, higher, and richer. That's the gist of it. It's Aspen Light is another way of thinking of it. Anyway, Bryan, not surprisingly, this has been a total treat. This is the longest we've actually gotten to do this, and we did no prep for it, which I knew we wouldn't have to. Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to, obviously, whatever we can do to be helpful if there's anything. Hey, wait, I forgot to ask. I sent you a pair of Prios. What do you think of them?
I love them. I wear them at the gym every day. They're fantastic. I haven't quite used them yet outdoor running. I'm not early. I need a little more prep time for that, but otherwise, fantastic. Love them. Yeah,
keep me posted when you finally get up the courage to run. You will find that you've been kicking yourself by not having done it sooner, is my hunch. So,
fair enough. Fair enough.
Anyway, total treat. And really quick, just to do the sign off. First of all, thank you all for listening and being part of one of my just solo rants. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in wherever we can do questions and we will answer them. If I see anything that Bryan needs to answer, I will forward that to him. Follow us in all the places you can follow us, subscribe and share, et cetera, et cetera. Come to www.jointhemovementmovement.com so you can find out more about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body and enjoy walking, running, hiking, or whatever it is you do for the rest of your life. I'm Stephen Sashin, and I just want to thank you. And as I love to say, live life feet first.